Hi everyone, and welcome to Chapter 2, Positive Traits. I know you all got to take that VIA survey and are very appreciative that I let you take the short survey and not the 240-item survey. If you do want to take the longer one, you are more than welcome to take that survey. It will give you a little bit of a better indication of exactly what your strengths are, but for now I think that the shorter version is just fine. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to look at what those strengths do. Now, I'm kind of dividing this week into two parts because so many of you have talked about, wanting to make these changes and how you make these changes. And to me, it really wouldn't seem very intelligent that if we decided to look at all this material and we didn't really understand how to apply it. So part of this is going to be to look at our signature strengths. And then you're going to notice that on the discussion board or in the think tank this week, we're going to look at how we can start to change our thought patterns a little bit. So some of those things that Sean Acor talked about on his videos, and so we're going to kind of start applying them. They're fun to do, and I think that we can start articulating our core values and our strengths and really how we go through life. So let's talk about let me get to the next slide here. We're going to talk about what we're going to discuss on these next slides, and we're going to go over the objectives a little bit. So we're going to look at the 5-factor theory, but first we're really going to look at a little bit of history that's associated with the VIA Strength Survey. We're also going to look at the traits related to the strengths. We're going to identify the strengths classifications, and then we're also going to look at how these strengths are ways to facilitate happiness in our own lives. A lot of times we take these surveys and they tell us, oh, your personality is like this, or oh, you are this type of person, but we really need to know what does that mean for us. And if you all had taken this test, especially those of you with children, there is actually a VIA for the children too, if you do want to take that for your children, and it can help identify their strengths. Now, the one biggest thing, and I forgot to look at objective number 5, I apologize. So now we're going to associate how strengths play a part in a person's life. So when we look at the strengths, whether we're talking about kids or we're talking about ourselves, we really want to understand not what our talents are in life, because those are much different than our strengths. Our talents are something, that we can do well as far as maybe playing an musical instrument, swimming, or other things. But when we talk about our strengths or our core values, then what we're talking about is we're talking about exactly how we move through life. So first off, I want to go on and I want to talk a little bit about the VIA Strength Survey. So let me get to that slide right here. And so when we talk about these core values, and I know that those of you in the military are going, hey, we have those in the military too. But when we're talking about these core values, we're talking about these main values in action or the VIA strengths. And these are significant to you and unique to you. You can take this survey with 5 different people and everybody's top 5 or top 10 are going to be different because this applies to you as a unique individual. So what is this values and action assessment? It's a psychological assessment that measures designed to identify an individual's profile for character strength. And I have the 2 individuals up here, Dr. Peterson and Dr. Seligman, who are responsible for creating this. So if we look down at our questions, positive psychology is concerned with not only emotional but positive traits as well. And that's true. There's a lot of surveys out there that look at only the emotions of a person. Are they an extrovert or are they an introvert? Are they depressed? Are they not depressed? So the one thing that I want everybody to keep in mind here is right from the get-go, what did we say positive psychology was all about? The positive psychology was all about taking that reference frame that we look at people's issues or problems and changing that and looking what's right with them. So we don't only look at the emotions of a person, but we look at a positive trait as well. Given the fact that a person might be depressed or might be in a lull in their life or might have anxiety, Does that mean all of a sudden all of their positive traits are taken away? Certainly not. So what we want to do is we want to take that focus and we want to shift it to looking at how can a person use those positive signature strengths in their life to pull them through maybe times that aren't so good, but even if they are good, it's to maybe even get them to a higher plateau. So what are our traits influenced by? Well, there's a number of different things that traits can be influenced by. So if we think about influencing behavior, it's really kind of an integrated thing, but I'm going to talk more about behavior, cognitive, and affect. So really, when we look at maybe our makeup and why we do certain things, this is, in some theorists will say this is the cart before the horse, but when we look at our behaviors, there's a motive for something. So in other words, we have to think about why we do something. And then we look at how it is going to affect the world, or how it's going to affect us, or what the effect is going to be on the world. So when we are looking at what traits are influenced by what, we look at the fact that our behaviors have a motive behind them, and it could be because it's something that we've learned. It could be a process that, you know, somebody has told us something in the past, and so really it is motives of cognition and then the affect. So when we look at this aspect, that's really what we're talking about. We can have thoughts and experience that also influence us, but when we talk about our traits, we're really talking about behavior, cognition, and affect. Okay, so let's see if there was anything else I wanted to discuss with you about that. So as we go on and we look at got to get to the first page here, got all my notes. Dr. Seligman and Dr. Peterson, so unlike the DSM with the scientifically categorized human deficits and disorders, what they're looking at with this classification is the positive of human strength. Moreover, this type of classification is centered on helping people recognize and build upon their strengths. In other words, if you think of having a scale and saying if a person comes in and they are at a -8, instead of saying to that person, okay, I can get you up to head above water, and let's be happy with that, what we want to do is we want to get that person from -8 to head above water to flourishing. So now we're looking at building upon those strengths. And so this is aligned with the overall goal of positive psychology movement, which aims to make people's lives more fulfilling rather than simply treating them as if they have a mental illness and just saying, you know, we'll get you to okay. So we want to get people to more than okay by capitalizing on their strengths. So let's look at the VIA itself. There is a new, it's called the VIA IS out right now, but we're just going to talk about the VIA. That's just a modification. And it's composed of 240 items, and it measures 24 of the character strengths. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in depth here in just a minute. So it's been available online since 2001, and over 400,000 individuals have taken this survey to find out what their signature strengths are. And of course now with courses such as this one and in many other universities also, and then it's also being integrated into counseling and therapy, that we see such a huge rise with using this scale in many different aspects of health and well-being. So we're going to go on and kind of look at the beginnings, or how should I say it, maybe more of a comparison of these two. And we're going to look at another type of scale that you guys all might be familiar with or have heard of at one time, which is the Big Five, or the 5-factor theory. And so we're going to do a little comparison and look at the Big Five, which in some cases of the VIA does have some association. In other words, in some ways it does look at some of the same things, and they have been correlated in some way. However, remember, the viewpoint or perspective is much different when these scales are implemented. So comparatively, let's look at them. The Big Five is derived from systematically clustering of exhaustive lists and adjectives used to describe a person's personality. So basically, they looked at a number of different factors, and then you can see I have over on the right-hand side of the page the types of scale that are used to describe a person's personality. And we're going to get into a little bit more in depth in here in just a minute. So today, many researchers believe that there are 5 core personality traits. Evidence of this theory has been growing over the past 50 years, beginning with the research of Dr. Feist in 1949, and then later expanded upon by Smith, Goldberg, and McRae and Costa. So the Big Five are broad categories of personality traits. While there are significant bodies of literature supporting the Big Five model of personalities, researchers don't always agree on the exact labels for each dimension. However, these 5 categories are usually described as follows. So think about your personality and just these five categories describing your personality. Extroversion. This trait includes characteristics such as excitable, sociability, talkative, assertiveness, and a high amount of emotional expressiveness. Agreeableness. The personality dimension that includes attributes such as trust, altruism, kindness, affection, and other pro-social behaviors. Conscientiousness. Common features of the dimension to include high levels of thoughtfulness, good wit, impulse control, and good direct behaviors. Those with high conscientiousness tend to be organized, mindful, and in details. Neuroticism. Individuals with high in this trait tend to experience emotional instability, anxiety, moodiness, irritability, and sadness. And then the last one is openness. This trait features characteristics such as imagination, insight, and those high in this trait also tend to have a broad range of interests. So it's important to note that each of these 5 personality factors represent a range between the 2 extremes. So for example, the extroversion represents a continuum between extreme extroversion, and extreme introversion. In the real world, most people lie somewhere in between. So when we look at the Big Five personality research, McRae and his colleagues have also found that the Big Five are remarkably universal. In one study, they looked at people from over 50 different cultures and found that the 5 dimensions could accurately be used to describe personality. So when we're talking about the VIA, and now we're talking about this personality, what are the stances of the 2? So if I told you, well, and you can look over again to the right, if I told you, well, you know, you scored high on neuroticism, agreeableness, and very low on conscientiousness, and very low on extroversion, what information is that going to give you as a person? What is that going to tell you about how that is going to affect your being, or what can that do for you to change any aspects of your life? So probably not much. A lot of times this is made, or these are used for a type of diagnosis or to help a therapist. But what we want to do with the VIA is, rather than just saying that, you know, here's you in a nutshell, we want to say, you know what, you have these core strengths and you have these strengths within you. And so here's how we want you to develop those. First off, we want you to recognize that, number 1, you do have these in you, and everybody has strengths within them. And number 2, that you can develop them in a number of different ways. So, then we're going to look at later exactly how those can be developed also. So when we talked about what the Big Five was derived from, let me see, where am I? Get back to that. Oh, here we are. So it was a systematic clustering of exhaustive lists of adjectives. So just descriptors of what a person can be like. And again, we can't really associate that to the via because with the via, it's more of an internal being of how we move through life, not just descriptors of what we're like. And all the following of the big 5 factors are, and they're all up here, they're showing you openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So that kind of sums up the big 5. All right. Okay, let's go on to slide 6 here and look at trait-related strengths. So again, we're looking at the differences between the via, and the reason I do the comparisons is so that you understand what the perspective is of positive psychology and the methods that we use to, I won't say evaluate a person, but the methods that we can use to help people understand themselves and what they encompass as a human being. So we looked at we're going to look at how we're going to cultivate some of these strengths. And we're looking at the different mindsets that are out there. So when we look at something like the big 5 traits, or we're going to look at another one here in just a minute too, we're looking at what is called more of the medical model, and it is a deficit mindset. So what a deficit mindset is it looks at, when we look at people, we lead off with what's wrong with them rather than looking and saying what's right with them. And so it's looking at repairing problems or issues with the person rather than saying, you know, everybody processes through life, things happen, and so let's give them these really nice bundle of strengths that if something does happen in life that they have them to fall back on as tools. Then we have looking at healing wounds. So basically bandaging what we think is wrong with them and identifying these deficits and studying what's wrong with people. Now then we come over to the health model, which is really what positive psychology is trying to move towards, and it's a strengths mindset that we all have strengths that are innate within us, that we have a building capacity. In other words, regardless of who we are, that we can build on those strengths. Of course, the first thing we have to do is know that we have them. And that it is a pivotal point for being able to release potential. And that we have to be able to understand what our strengths are so that we can nurture them and we can study what's right with people too. We already talked about the pendulum, about how much study has been done in the past with looking at people's or the negative attributes of people and studying what's wrong with people. And so now we're trying to swing that pendulum, and one of these ways that we're doing it is by starting to study what's right with people. And one of those ways is looking at the via and understanding the different strengths of human beings. Okay, so what does the via stand for? If you all remember that from the very first slide, that was values and action. Strengths and virtues are explicitly set out to. So what do you think that the strengths and virtues explicitly set out to do? Let me get my little notes here so I can help you out. So is it to understand personality? So we talked about just understanding the personality as the big 5. We don't want to just understand personality. We want a person to be able to know who they are and to know their strengths and to be able to use those to move them through life. So how about to construct another personality test that is more updated? Well, we already know that there's a lot of theorists out there that like the big 5 traits, and so that they do use that for a model. So identify personality traits associated with living well. That sounds pretty close to what we want, doesn't it? So when we're looking at the via and when we're looking at positive psychology, our stance and our mindset and our view is always looking at well-being of people and living well. So just keep that in mind too. Okay, I don't want to go ahead in this one. I hope I'm not, let's see, identifying the traits. Give me 1 minute here because I do not want, yeah, we can move on to the next one. I look like a paper monster sitting here in front of my desk. Just want you all to know. Okay, so let's go on and let's identify via strengths and classification. So right here, you'll see all the different 24 character strengths. So you had a set of character strengths that you fall into that are unique to you. And it's going to give you just a little idea. This slide, you probably aren't going to be able to see it too well, but I'm going to send everybody some information on the character strengths and looking at the 24 character strengths. It's also in our book too, so that it'll give you a little bit more in-depth information. But I'm also going to send you information that goes over the character strengths and then gives you ideas on how to strengthen your strengths. And you know, some of these ideas, when you read them over, they're like, go see a movie, a funny movie or something. But if you're a person who is curious or open-minded or whatever, there's a number of different really kind of neat things that you can do to really kind of start building on your strengths. And they're not really difficult exercises. They don't take you a long time. It just takes a little bit of mindfulness. And guess what? Down the road, we get to learn about mindfulness. So, see how all this stuff is compounding? All right, so I'm off on a tangent, so let me pull myself back in here and get back to some of this good information. So a strength is the capacity for feeling, thinking, and behaving a way that allows for optimal functioning in the pursuit of a valued outcome. In other words, when you have a goal, or however you relate to somebody else, there is a reason why you do something or engage in something that you know that you're going to meet that goal. What carries you through? So again, we're going to look at a little bit of a comparison. Our book doesn't talk about this, but I felt that this is a really good comparison of the Clifton Strength Finder. And some of you might have taken this if you ever wanted to go for a new job or to find out what you were good at. And so the Clifton Strength Finder measures situational themes of talent and or strength and competence, whereas the VIA strength measures positive psychological traits or strengths of character. So if you think about it, you can be really good at something. You might be the greatest salesperson in the world, but what carries you through that sale? What allows you to maybe talk to the family? What allows you to do whatever it is, be appreciative of the job that you have and want to do well in it? So there's a number of different things that are associated in that. So again, the comparison with the Clifton Strength Finder is that it focuses on human talent. It's discovered within us, or identified as innate, that there are probabilities of natural tendencies, and it can be developed through effort. Whereas the VIA are character traits identified as important and appreciated. In other words, for you to be able to develop them, you have to identify them and appreciate them in yourself. That they are not innate. These are something that over time are created, that they are potentialities and they need nurturing, but can be developed through effort. And I'm going to tell you a little story later as we go through this, but I don't want to confuse you right now. So, there are how many traits in the VIA? So there are 24 character strengths. Okay, let me get on to, let's see, the next one here. Man, we're just running through these. We are on 8 already. So the VIA is a classification that offers the positive flip side of traditional classification and disorder found in the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the Mental Disorders. Now this was one of the huge things that Dr. Seligman wanted to take and ruffle the feathers of a lot of psychologists. Many of them call him, I don't know, just a huge opposer to the DSM. He's not a huge believer in it because he thinks it focuses so much on the negative. So really, this is looking at the strengths is one way that he feels kind of combats against looking at individuals in a negative way. So the VIA list provides a common language for strength-based approach to character development as well as psychological diagnosis and treatment. So there have been arguments against the VIA, and over time, if you look at any library and you want to look for psychological testing, there's volumes and volumes of excerpts on how many different types of tests that you can get out there. So a lot of theorists have looked at positive psychology and looked at the way that the VIA has been done, and they just said, you know, this is kind of old wine in new bottles. You know, and I'm not going to argue for or against the VIA because that's something that you all can decide or research for yourself. But again, if we look at the viewpoint of which is addressing the human personality, it's developing a health-based model versus a medical model of incorporating what's wrong with people. So here it just says one of the arguments against the VIA is that it's old wine in a new bottle. So, you know, just like anything else, there's going to be opposition, you know, and that's fine. We're going to find that all over, and especially in psychology. All right, so let's go on, and let me see. Oh, boy, I think we are to the end. So let's look at the very last slide, and I wanted to tell you a story here because I want you to understand. So what are these associated with? So, you know, why would we need to understand our own strengths? Well, first off, I don't know about you, but I thought it was kind of cool to understand, you know, that I had a gift for seeing beauty in everything around me because I had always suspected that since I have always loved all my students and enjoyed being around them so much. So that was one trait that I continuously tried to develop. But knowing your strengths too, and not just knowing them, but knowing that there's different ways of knowing them. And what I mean by that is if you will look through your classifications, you'll see that, like bravery talks about, it can include strength, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be physically strong. And so in my story, I'm going to kind of highlight on that a little bit. So there's a good consensus that when we understand our own strengths, that it can result in a number of different things. One is personal well-being, also interpersonal well-being, and social well-being. So it really articulates over to a number of different things in our life. So, you know, it doesn't promise that there's not going to be bad times, but it does give you the ability to thrive in the midst of hardship. In other words, one of the things that when I was counseling was that, you know, people would come in and they would say to me, you know, I feel depressed, and their eyes would immediately hit the floor, like they were shamed by feeling depressed. And, you know, there is no shame in going through certain processes in life. Everybody does it, or will at some point in their time, and something will happen, and somebody's going to need help. But what if we gave those people this really nice little toolkit that said, you know what, when you feel depressed, that's a natural emotion, and at times we certainly should feel depressed because sometimes, you know, life just does us wrong or bad things happen. But how about if we can compartmentalize that, and we can also look at the good things in your life too. So, and we can balance it out a little bit more. So in order to give that person a good toolkit, then they have to understand that just because they might be going through depression, just because they might be going through anxiety, or anything else in their life, even substance abuse, you know, people get hooked on the prescribed painkillers, or somebody made a mistake in their life, and so they feel like, you know, they're not worthy of other people's love or compassion or empathy. And so if we can get people to change their mind to understand that, you know what, these things happen in life, but I have a toolkit that can help me to carry me through these times. And I can understand that even though I have negative things going on, here I can pull out my positive toolkit and I can help myself get through this. And it's just a process of life. It's not a definer in life. In other words, we shouldn't define people by a disorder. An individual that might have a type of disorder might be still a wonderful mother. They might be a wonderful teacher. They might be a wonderful friend, neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. So really looking at that is that we shouldn't all of a sudden, because something's popped up that says, oh, you know what, they're depressed. They're not defined by the depression. They should not be defined by the negative aspects. So what positive psychology and the VIA is trying to do is to give individuals a toolkit that they can use to understand how they can pull themselves through. And not only pull themselves through, but when they do have good times in their life too, that they can get to even higher plateaus. Okay, I said I wanted to tell you a story real quick. And when I talked before about knowing your strengths and kind of understanding what is meant by your strength, is that sometimes we don't even recognize our own potential and where other people do. And have you ever had somebody kind of explain to you who they think you are, and you are taken back a little bit and you think, is that really me? Well, there's times in life that we don't even recognize our own potential and our own strength. So this is another good thing about the VIA, because the VIA kind of makes a person reflect on themselves. Is that really me? My top 3 or 5 strengths, when I first took the test, I was pretty curious about it too. And then I started really thinking about it, and I had been in the military for a while, so I had assumed that bravery was going to be one of them, which was not one of my top 5 strengths. So the story that I want to talk about is then right after I had started getting into positive psychology and teaching it and involved with a number of different organizations, I told my mom to take the VIA survey. And when she took it, I think we had just lost my father 2 years prior to that. And so she took the test, and she called me back the next day, and she said, do not give that test to your students. And I said, why not, Mom? Why? You know, it's Dr. Seligman, he's smart, he's, you know, the head of the positive psychology movement. I would think that he would be smart enough to know what he's talking about. She says, no. She says, that test is bad. She said, it does not represent me at all. And I said, well, what do you mean, Mom? And she said, the test on my #1 thing I got was bravery. And she says, now, she says, Lynn Marie, and because, you know, when she needs something very serious from me, she calls me by my first and middle name. She says, Lynn Marie, this test does not represent me. I am not a brave person. And I said, well, Mom, I said, you know, you need to really think about that. And she said, well, I've never been to war. She's like, I've never been out. I've never been a leader of a company. She's like, I've never done anything on my own as far as had to go and do anything on my own without your father. She's like, that is just not me. And I said, well, what have you done all your life, Mom? And she said, well, she said, you know, I took you guys and we've moved around with your father. And I said, where did we move from? She says, well, from the States to Canada. I said, did you know anybody when we got to Canada? She said, no. She says, we just moved here. I said, okay. And I said, so what else have you done, Mom? And she says, well, she goes, I raised you guys. And then she said, I went to college. I finished up my last year of college after you guys went off to school and were out of the house. And I said, and Mom, what were the ages of the students that were there with you? And she said, oh, about 18, 20, 25. I said, so you were the oldest student there? She says, yeah. I said, did you feel weird? She says, yeah, a little. And then I said, well, what else did you do? And she said, well, then I went out and I got a job. And she said, I started working with people and I kind of moved up. And I said, okay. I said, well, you know, and she says, but I was in a small town. And I said, okay. I said, what else did you do, Mom? And she said, well, I decided then that at that point that I really did like helping people. And she said, I became a hospice care provider. And I said, Mom, how many people can do what you did? And she says, what do you mean? She says, anybody can go in and help somebody else. And I said, no, Mom. I said, not many people can go in to a situation knowing that the person that you're going to care for is probably going to be gone within the next month or 2 months. And I said, I think it takes a very brave person to console a family and a person who is dying. And I said, so, you know, that to me shows me that you have a lot of bravery in you. And it was dead silent for probably about 20 seconds. So I said, Mom, are you still there? Or did you hang up on me? And she said, no, but I never thought about that. She said, you know, not only did I do that, but I nursed your dad for the 8 years that he was sick. She said, I nursed his mother. I helped out my mother. And she says, you know what? I think I am a very brave person in life. So the moral of the story is that sometimes we might not see the strengths that we have in us, but we do have the strengths in us. So it's how you view the different strengths too. And sometimes what you might need to do is with your top strengths after you look at them is ask other people, do you see me like this? Because we often don't see ourselves the same way that other people see us or the true way that we are. Okay, that wraps up this lecture. So I hope you all enjoyed finding out what your strengths are, and also using those handouts and things that I sent along so that you can start exercising or strengthening your strengths. So I will see you in the think tank, and have a good week.